Okay. Good. Okay. Good afternoon, good morning, dear colleagues and friends. To start, I want to thank Professor Paul Cobley and my colleague and friend Roman for the invitation to participate in this tribute to Professor Thomas Sebeok. My time as a president of the Latin American Federation of Semiotics has allowed me to have a panoramic vision of its work, its tradition, with above all its influences. In this important then, in this tribute approach its influence and the ways how it manifests itself. Thomas Sebeok used to say that Roman Jacobson spoke 50 languages, but all in Russian. The same thing happens with the 5 languages that I speak, all in Spanish, in the Mexican version. Sorry for that. Okay, sorry. Okay. Sorry, okay. I have organized my reflection in following contents. The first one, the semiotic work. The second one, the collective work and semiotic network. The third, scientific communication and the notion of influence. And the conclusion. My work is based in 3 backgrounds, which explain my relationship with work of Thomas Sebeok. The number one is the connection with Umberto Eco. The second one is the Urbino seminaries in Italy.
Alfredo, wait a little, please.
Okay, it's okay now, no?
Yes, yes.
Okay. The University of Urbino is important because of the International Center of Semiotic Linguistics, and it was where I had the opportunity to meet him and where he introduced me to Roman Esqueda. The relationship with this center reflects a consistent part of his work in the dissemination of the semiotics network. Here where you can see one of his work present as documenti di lavoro and as a draft. Now the center is not Centro Internazionale di Semiotica e Linguistica. Now the center changed the name for Centro Internazionale di Scienze Semiotiche Umberto Eco, but this is the continuity. The third point resides in the work dedicated focusing on showing the development in Latin America and Ibero-America in linguistic semiotics. Then, the past reflection allows us to ask the following question. On what aspect of the semiotic file in its disciplinary uses can be observed the impact and influence of Thomas Sebeok in the development of Latin American semiotics? In order to answer, it's important to start with a panoramic view of his main works. We chose the following criteria in order to organize his work and facilitate our reflection for the presentation. We look 4 keys to understand the semiotic work of Thomas Sebeok, ranging from the 1940s to the most recent posthumous publication or reprints. The first one is the academic production. After this, the academic level of the works. The communicative level used in works is determined. And the last one is the editorial work. We identify the main works and organize them following a chronological criteria. For example, the approach of semiotics, and we can see more or less the works, the principal works. As it is a panoramic view, it is not exhaustive and does not include articles published in dozens of magazines. It is possible to divide the work of Thomas Sebeok into different levels according to the schematization of Aristotelian influence. We refer to Paulo Fabri. Number one, the philosophical conception of semiotics is filed in the breadth of the exercise in the study of it. Second one is the theories of sign, of interpretation, or sociosemiotics of gesture, and the work that relate to this concept for formalized a comprehensive proposal. The third one is the method of analysis and approach to the verification and demonstration of the semiotic postulate. And the last one is the analysis carried out on the choice of the study objects. In this table, we have placed in each box a representative work where one of the levels predominates. For example, in the philosophical biosemiosis, in theoretical sociosemiotic, that speak with the methodologics, for example, and the methodological is important, the doctrine of science, in the analytical and applicative, the method of analysis. Okay. Now, by speaking of a communicative level, we can identify the audience to whom the text is directed and identify the communicative goal. There are three different types of semiotics, types of scientific communication. I refer Altieri Biaggi and Jacobi. Number one, the specialized communication that exists between an expert who dialogues with another expert. The pedagogical communication, when the expert teaches his students the principles of science. And the dissemination as communication indicates that the expert tries to explain how empirical experience can be described by science. And then we have placed it in each box the most representative works ordered according to their communication strategy. For example, we find these books in the specialized communication. In pedagogy, we find these, and dissemination is other books. Another way to organize Sebeok's book works is in the editorial use he gave them. The editorial production of Thomas Sebeok showed 4 different types of publication: book, dictionary, or compilation of things. The first one is the figure of compiler, where he gathered the work of other researchers around the general topic. Like author are the works made by Thomas Sebeok of his own authorship. And the third one, the editor, these are works compiled by Sebeok, where there is hardly an introduction, or in many cases, it is not done. The author editor and this publication brings together the work that also includes his articles. Then, in this scheme, we present the works gathered according to the editorial strategy carrier. For example, these books, and these books like an author, like an editor, or an editor-author, for example. Okay. The following section shows the meaning of a network in the works of Thomas Sebeok. He calls the network like a web. We return to the previous case to understand the semiotic influence of Thomas Sebeok in Latin America. The communicative level, the academic level, and the editorial work. The communicative level is for Sebeok an inheritance taken from Charles Sanders Peirce and a coincidence with Umberto Eco in the search for a manifestation of the theoretical concept in everyday experience. This is the most quoted work for illustrating the operation and Applied Semiotics that put together Thomas Sebeok and Umberto Eco, but exists on a previously edition do it by Jen and Sebeok too. Okay. The introduction to the book includes from a verse where Eco and Sebeok coincide in emphasizing that they do not consider semiotic as a study of cause and effects on relationships. On the contrary, they recognize a broader vision when speaking of semiotics. At the academic level, we can observe the important contribution of compilation, collective works, and topics approaches from a transdisciplinary perspective. The very idea of calling them landscape and web shows two broad conception of a semiotic work, not limited to countries, university, or school, but the necessary dialogue between all of them. The third point refers to editorial work and the ability to transform personal efforts into collective work. This is the case with Monica Rector's work on Carnival and its transformation into a reference and foundational book in the Iberian American or Latin American world. The following section starts from the conception of influence and the ways of manifestation itself in the work of Thomas Sebeok. We take the concept of influence from two dictionary definitions, right? Diccionario de la Real Academia Española and the Oxford Dictionary. And we find three meanings: the authority, the autoridad de alguien, or the authority for someone, the persona con poder o autoridad, and the capacity to have an effect. Then, Sebeok ways influence are the capacity to have an effect on the character, development, or behavior on someone or something or the effect itself. The authority of someone towards another or other people. And the person with power or authority, with this intervention, advantage can be obtained. We include 16 texts from 3 generations of Latin American semiologists to observe the effects of Sebeok's work to influence the development of semiotics. In Brazil, for example, we can find Monica Rector, Carnival, or Lucia Santaella Braga. In Uruguay, Luisa Bloch de Béjar. In Argentina, Juan Magariños, Roberto Marafiotti, Magariños in another book, Jorge Warley, and José Luis Caivano. In Peru, the book of Oscar Quesada Maquiavelo. In Ecuador, Alberto Pereira Valarezzo. In Colombia, Douglas Niño. And in Mexico, Garza Cuarón, Mauricio Belchot, Carlos Vidales, Vivian Romeu y Tanius Karam. Poyatos, that he is from Spain. Maybe he works in United States University. I don't remember what. Okay, the main influence of the semiotic approach of Thomas Sebeok in America and in Latin America are observed at many levels. The philosophical conception influenced the general concept devised for the reflection the position of semiotics in the field of science. The theories are discussed in support of the arguments themselves, whether they are used in support or in opposition. The method of analysis used as a validate procedure for analytical work. The analysis carried out as examples for the effectiveness or not of the method used. In this scheme, we collocate the main works of Latin American production where Sebeok is recognized for a level of scientific authority in the philosophical way. We find these books, the theoretical, this other, in the methodological and in applicative. Then, We now proceed to collocate each Sebeok book according to the number of quotations made by Latin American authors where he is mentioned at a specific level. For example, this book is cited for these books. In these books, the sign and introduction of semiotics is used in these other books. The classical semiotic is mentioned in these books, and the sociosemiotic in this book. And the textual quotes have been observed quantitative level and not whether they agree with Sebeok's position. We find these books in Latin American production, okay, and in some cases we have grouped the books according to the author consideration. For example, Thomas Sebeok says that amusement, contribution, and design of master are a trilogy. Then we take this trilogy and observe it in what Latin American production was mentioned. We have these other results. Then the influence as also seen in the tributes and the presence in the publication of various Latin American and Ibero-American magazines. Then we are running out of time. That is the reason why we can take more exhaustive look to the work and observe the direct influence in each generation of Latin American semiologists. The task is left for another time. Then the influence is observed in his writing in various publications, which serves as a reference to observe another form of approach to the doctrine of science. For example, in the number 3 of the Signis magazine, in America, the magazine of the Federación Latinoamericana de Semiótica, Thomas Sebeok participated with this text about the gesture, translated in Portuguese by Monica Rector. There are another contribution. For example, from this standpoint, we share with other perspectives, such as a pinhole discipline on position limited about schools or academic figures. The other influence we can see in the continuous presence of articles and the tribute dedicated to him. For example, in the Semiosis magazine, the Instituto de Investigaciones Literarias de la Universidad Veracruzana. Y in last position, we consider the lexicon. In a lexicon that reflects concepts necessary to understand semiotics and are also quoted by new generation of semiologists. For example, the concept of general semiotics, the concept of sign, the semiotics thinking, the abduction, and the sociosemiotics and the biosemiotics. Then this is all that I have to say, and I'm trying to be not take many time because we are short time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alfredo. Okay, thank you very much. I think what we'll do is I'll present my paper, and then we can open a little session of questions and conversations around our presentations. So let me show you my screen here. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about this kind of strange influence of Thomas Sebeok on other areas of semiotics, which is not directly called semiotics, but professional practices in this case. And this has a lot to do with my own experience on studying semiotics and going to Indiana University to try to study semiotics. In 1991, I received a Fulbright scholarship to study semiotics and marketing, which could be called applied semiotics. So the people from the Fulbright scholarship tried to find me a place in an American university. but they couldn't. It was very hard for them because they said, well, there's some professor in South Florida which is interested in applied semiotics, and he's interested, but you should take your doctoral degree on marketing. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do semiotics and marketing. So it was kind of hard, that situation. So finally, I said, I want to go to Indiana because I know Thomas Sebeok and Jean Sebeok are there, and I know they will understand what I'm trying to. So that's the reason why I got my scholarship to go to Indiana for 1 academic year. And I met Thomas and Jean and many other very interesting semioticians there. So it was a very, very interesting situation for me, because in the work of Thomas Sebeok, I found exactly what I wanted to do. So I went on to understand a little bit more of Thomas Sebeok's semiotics. And I quote from Ponzio, this article he wrote, where he speaks about what we all the people who knew Thomas Sebeok personally and who spoke to him, we knew what he was talking about in this kind of informal situation. But in this quote from Ponzio, he speaks about the numerous publications of Sebeok, where he propounded a wide-ranging vision of semiotics that converges with the study of evolution of life. Following Sebeok, both the conception of the semiotic field and the history of semiotics have radically changed. So what I was trying to do had some relation with this position of Thomas around semiotics, which is not a specialized field. See, so when I was there and I was trying to find a program where I could develop my ideas, I found it impossible. So I was kind of desperate. And Thomas talked to me and he said, the problem is that semiotics has to be all around. It's not a subject of specialization. Semiotics flows around the whole world. So, and I was like, yes, I was kind of frustrated because I couldn't find a doctoral program to study, but he kept me thinking about these ideas of semiotics as something else, as something that flew all around disciplines and all of this. So that was kind of fascinating to me. Then he also spoke, obviously, about how semiotic unites and how semiotic unites with other fields of knowledge and human praxis, generally kept separate either for justified exigencies of specialized order or because of a useless and even harmful tendency towards short-sighted sectoralization. So you see, this was kind of very, very interesting for me, because that was exactly what I was trying to do. Why do we separate semiotics from practical issues? Practical issues should be explained and imbued with semiotics. So this was a very, very influential thing for me. And then it was a very fascinating year, 1991, because we had these meetings with people from cognitive sciences. And that was my first contact with cognitive science. And I thought there should be something linking cognitive science, biology, and semiotics. So as Thomas Sebeok says in the play of Amusement, the pivotal motive pervading the argument of this entire trilogy of his previous works and interviews throughout all of these papers is my absolute conviction that semiotics begins and ends with biology. So I thought that's very interesting. I went to this conference on biosemiotics at Toronto University, and I started to think, why not putting together neuroscience, even from the cellular level, with semiotics? So I heard some very interesting papers on this subject. And then he was also talking about semiotics and cognitive science. As I quote from this introduction by some authors, Thomas Sebeok came also to see a great affinity between semiotics and cognitive science, as the latter was developing toward the end of the 20th century. So from this influence of Thomas Sebeok, and most of it about by reading his books and his papers, and by talking to him and to Jean as well, it was very, very interesting for me to start thinking about semiotics in this kind of different way, not in the more traditional linguistic centered kind of semiotics, but in this kind of more biologically, more interrelated with other fields of study. So what I came to do then was I found three great influences of Sebeok's work in my own work, that which was what I was trying to do at Indiana. So the first of was the relation between biosemiotics and cognitive sciences. Sebeok said, semiotics is found to be at least as richly infused with content as what is today practiced under the label cognitive sciences, the domain of which is in fact essentially coterminous in its gist and problematic, if not necessarily in methodology, with that of semiotics. So I took this as a starting point for my own work. And then this is the reason why I went to Indiana. The first papers on semiotics in the marketplace. Of course, there was the French papers of Jean-Marie Floch around semiotics and marketing, but I was very influenced by Sebeok and by Jean's work on marketing. But here I found the first interesting thing for me, which is what Thomas said, the great early rhetorical treatises, such as Quintilian's elaborate institutes of oratory, that can be profitably reread as how-to manuals for such ancient but not less valid marketing techniques. So then I started to think about rhetoric, neuroscience, semiotics, and marketing to do my own research. And then, of course, the great influence my readings of Thomas had on abduction. And fortunately, at the Indiana University library, we had the collected papers, so I could read the whole thing, so as to understand Peirce in a deeper sense. So these three influences of the work of Thomas Sebeok on my work were translated. So biosemiotics became my interest in cognitive semiotics, which wasn't not yet conceptualized like that in those years. So I made a kind of analysis starting from neuroscience and what is called second generation cognitive science. Of course, semiotic in the marketplace, because I thought I need to prove that whatever I research can be observed and can be tested. My hypothesis should be tested in the marketplace. So my marketing experience as a marketing research professional was my field of study. That was where I could test my hypotheses and prove if they were correct or if I had to change some things. And then, of course, Persian semiotic and abduction, where I could find that creative research and research of creative processes could be important for semiotics. So I started to think about applying all these things to my own practice. And I was working at a university, which is Anáhuac University in Mexico, which is a private university, which was, and I was working on graphic design. So I needed to answer that too. I needed to work for graphic designers as well. So I invited Thomas Sebeok to come to our university. So I was at Indiana, but then I organized a meeting with Sebeok. So he came to teach at Anáhuac University. And everybody was quite surprised because, of course, he spoke about sociosemiotics and biosemiotics, and everyone was like, what is this? They were quite surprised by what they heard. But then we started doing our own research on those fields. And this is the book that I wrote by those years. So Sebeok visited our university in 1992 and on the graphic design program. But then his visit was followed by Jean's visit to our program. And then I invited Floyd Merrill, John Dealey, who spent an academic year with a Fulbright scholarship, because I invited him to come to Anáhuac, and he was in touch with my doctoral dissertation leader, the professor which was directing my work. And then Jan-Marie Klinkenberg from Group Mu came to our program as well. So I started developing my own research on the creative processes of designers. How could they translate linguistic sentences, linguistic structures to graphics, to graphic design? And this is what I started doing. First of all, I was basing my ideas on Sebeok's biosemiotics, but I translated it into neuroscience of mental imagery, especially at that time, Gosling's work on the brain, image and brain, and all his works on mental imagery. So I did some empirical research with more than 800 cases of controlled design processes with my students and students from all over Mexico, Mexican universities. And I did my research based in cognitive neuroscience. I wanted to find if there were some rules that could explain the mental processing of linguistic sentences into graphic products. And then, of course, I was basing my my research on abduction, and I tried to have some hypotheses where the mind transformed concepts into images via complex selections of rhetorical figures. What I did was interview all the students that I worked with who were trying to explain what they were doing. And they didn't notice many things that they were doing. But in all the cases, their descriptions followed rhetorical figures, were conducted by rhetorical figures, but complex rhetorical figures, not a single rhetorical figure, but something very complex was happening there. And then I used Group Mu theory of rhetorical figures, and that's why Jan-Marie Klinkenberg came into the scene, because I was using his theory to explain mental processing, not just rhetorical figures, which were already out there in some prints or something, but the mental processing of information. And then I went to test all of this in real, let's say real life graphic design projects, where I can work with my clients and prove that this was the case. So this is what I did. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but I found that whenever a graphic designer worked with a concept or with a bunch of concepts, which they call briefs, graphic design briefs that the client gives them, their mind translates all of this using subconscious, because nobody calls them rhetorical figures. They don't know they are doing rhetorical figures, but the way they speak about it are all rhetorical figures. So I found that they used basically three big families of rhetorical figures according to Group Mu, which are synecdochical, conceptual, or material synecdochies. For example, when they wanted to do a poster for Mexico City, they would use a part of Mexico City, which was really meaningful. So we had a material synecdoche, but when they were talking about love, they used to work with a specific kind of love. So that was a conceptual synecdoche. But then those synecdoches could be transformed into formal metonymical images or causal metonymies. They also use instrumental metonymies, container metonymies, etc., and of course metaphorical processing. But then what was very interesting for me was that they were not single rhetorical figures, but sequences of mental processing that produce these images. So I started working with this kind of framework, as I told you, basically on and inspired by Thomas Sebeok's work. And then I came with this book where I found the rules of processing, which are expressed as sequences of rhetorical figures that could prove valid in professional landscapes. So it was very hard for me to interview professional designers, because when you interview a designer, he tries to explain everything. So he goes very freely through all of that. And the point of view, their point of view is that this is a kind of black box that cannot be explained. This is like inspiration, creativity, and they use all these kinds of things. So I needed to find some books, editions, where graphic designers, without going to such an very extended description, where they try to figure out what they were doing. And all of these descriptions that I found in many books, in international produced books, could follow the rules that I had found. So everything could be explained through these rules that I have here, which then later I would call some kind of parallel processing system in the mind of the designers, because all of this happens simultaneously. It's not that they think I'm going to write to draw this rhetorical figure. No, that doesn't happen. Everything happens simultaneously. So you have like different levels of processing, and then through rhetorical figures, and then they come out with this. For example, if you see the poster at the right bottom of Barcelona with the blue and the stripes, there are a lot of very interesting rhetorical figures here. The most important one, of course, is the metaphor of athletic competition with these strong, violent strokes. But then you have the metonymic colors of the Olympic rings. And then the designer explained, and Barcelona is blue because it's a Mediterranean city and the sky is always blue. And we have another relation there, another rhetorical relation there. So then we go to the marketplace. And when I work with my clients in marketing, every marketing graphic design solution or design solution can be explained and predicted by this mental processing that I have found there. So when we went to see some non-commercial things like these projects that were had important prizes at the creativity festivals. This is against bullying and is made by UNICEF. They are following exactly the same productive rules of mental processing. So what happens with this is that many universities in Mexico and in Latin America, not interested at all in semiotics, are using these books to develop their design programs. They are trying to develop their own design programs using semiotics without knowing it. And all of this is based on Thomas Sebeok's semiotics, which was the original inspiration for doing this kind of research. So what kind of semiotics is this? How can we explain this? What kind of thing is this? So I think Sebeok's influence on design turns out to be one step from semiotic descriptions to semiotic as a new technique. But what kind of technique is this? So I found this very interesting article by Vincent Colapietro, which is Peirce's rhetorical turn, where he says Peirce said, our conception of rhetoric has got to be generalized, indeed enlarged beyond anything yet imagined. The first step is to remove the restriction of rhetoric to speech, and by implication, writing also when we take into account works of art. That's Peirce. And then this is one of his latest works. Peirce, acknowledges at once the possibility of a universal art of rhetoric. Such an art will disclose the general secret of rendering signs effective. In this context, a sign is, and he keeps following, and he says he is one of his big lists that we all know Peirce like to do this. He spoke about every picture, every diagram, natural cry, pointing finger, wink, knot in one's handkerchief, memory, dream, fancy, concept, indication, token, symptom, letter, numeral, word, sentence, chapter, book, library, everything has to be understood and made through this kind of universal art of rhetoric. So this is the kind of influence that Sebeok's work has had in graphic design schools. So people are doing this kind of thing. And of course, there have been a lot of books and articles on this and other transformations of all of this. So I would like to thank Thomas Sebeok for all his work and how he has influenced a lot of people who don't even know that they have been influenced by Thomas. Thank you very much. So let me just let anyone speak. Okay, is it open now? No. Let me see how can I do this.
Roman, I have a question of your paper.
Okay, thank you.
Just to kick us off,
Okay.
and it's very current. You know, exceedingly current. In the last few minutes, I got an email. I got an email from somebody, and it bears upon what you were saying about the transformation in this field that you started to recognize around about 1991. I think probably that is the crucial year. I think you're absolutely correct. But my question is, the realization that there is some bearing on cultural semioses beyond the human into the fields of semiosis in general and cognition, which you were talking about period. Has it really come? I suppose is my question. This is the email that I got this afternoon. I wrote a reference for somebody last week, and the people that I was writing for at the university, it was a university overseas. It was a complete stranger, but he came back to me, and I think he knew some of my work, and he said, I'm sending you an article which is merely evoking the issue of biosemiotics briefly, but which expresses a general frustration over the reluctance of my colleagues in consumer culture theory to engage in dialogues with anything that does not emanate from human cultural disciplinary perspectives. So I published this before I started reading even more widely in biosemiotics. Do you really think that that much has changed since 1991 in that respect, in terms of, you know, the influence of the kind of things that that Tom Sebeok was interested in?
Thank you very much for your question, Tom. I think it's very complicated. Well, at least I work with marketing people, and marketing people tend to be like very practical. They don't care that much about theoretical issues or anything like that. But when you can start explaining them what's happening, and then you go into these kind of more in-depth questions, then they open themselves because they know it's useful for them to know some of these things. But I think what is happening now is that the advancements of neuroscience are very, very interesting. Like I spoke with Caleb Ikulu at Buenos Aires at our meeting. And I think the advancements that we have in knowing how the brain works, for example, are very important for semiotics. Because, for example, I was trying to do this for my paper where I didn't have enough time to do it. But when I see how graphic designers work, or marketing people work, or advertising people work, if we explain some of their processing through neuroscience, for example, they have this kind of Hebbian learning. They have these very strict things that happen in their brain, and they don't notice it. But then they have other kinds of processing, which cannot be explained by a Hebbian nature, by a Hebbian explanation of how the brain works. So it's very, very interesting, because I think people are opening more on this subject, and of course we have the help from people like the System 1 and System 2 expressions of Daniel Kahneman, which have been very popular in marketing, for example. And they don't know that behind all that, it's a very hard science behind that. But they only see the surface of it. But that's helpful for me, because then they can engage in this dialogue, and then they can try to know more in depth about it. But it's a very interesting point. Thank you very much. I can see if there are some other questions or comments? Yes?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of things are fascinating coming out of cognitive and neurological sciences. At the same time, we don't want to be reductionistic and ground everything at that level or any other level. And at the same time, we don't want to engage in gaming whatever we think the system is, whether it's neurological or social or cultural or whatever, at any one time. And it seems that a lot of social discourse and behavior, at least in what I experience in the West, is very much about gaming. Everyone wants to find science's G-spot or whatever. And I don't see us backing off from that. We need enlightenment.
Of course, I totally agree. And I think that's very interesting as well, because people don't, when I started working in marketing and all these kinds of things, I was very much working with Aristotle's rhetoric, but nobody knew that. So humanities are always there. And those are a balancing point from hard sciences and everything. But as we all know, in the case of neuroscience, I would say it's a soft science, because the stronger the research on in depth of the brain, it comes to a much more open science, a science that is flexible, because with neuroplasticity, the brain is a plastic processing device, let's say that. So that's very interesting, because I think we're getting closer every time. We're not separating. We're getting very, very close. And I remember now the discussions that we've had at the Research Center for Language and Semiotic Studies with cognitive scientists, because at that time everything seemed to be quite separated. And Tom's work was a way to mix things and to understand things critically from both sides. So I think that's a very, very interesting thing to do. Thank you, Merlin.
Let's have a look.
Hi, Susan.
Hello, Roman. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Hello to everybody. It was great listening to you. I was just, yes, listen, I'm sorry I came late because I'm teaching, so I wasn't able to be present for the whole meeting. But so I've just picked, bits and pieces up. But, when you talk about semiotics of marketing, I've been wondering, what exactly do you mean? When you look at and when you practice semiotics of marketing? I ask because from my own point of view, I'm critical from a philosophical and ideological point of view of the market. To me, when you talk about semiotics of marketing, Audrey, we're talking about today. We're talking about an economical system, globalization, now in its extreme phase of development, producing all sorts of illnesses, social illnesses. And I use Tom Sebeok's work to talk about social symptomatology, if anything. We need to look at the symptoms, the signs of society today to see in what state the health of semiosis is. Because one of his axioms that he posited was that where there is life, there is semiosis. So I was just wondering, what is your approach to semiotics of marketing? And then I also add that I agree totally with Merdin's comment. We have to be very, very careful about reductionism. So we mustn't run the risk or repeat the error that was committed when the plan was to reduce all sciences, the language of all sciences, to the language of physics at the time. and so I agree, you know, I sort of feel that all this stuff about cognitive sciences and neurosciences today, yes, of course, research advances, and that's absolutely fundamental. But, you know, we do have to listen and relate to all this, I think, critically. But anyway, I was interested in your conception of semiotics of marketing.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, okay, that's very interesting. When I started working in marketing, I was quite surprised. Let me tell you this anecdote. I started working in marketing, and we were evaluating this kind of commercial ad where a blonde, beautiful woman was cleaning the floor. And it was trying to persuade middle class, low class people in Mexico that to use that kind of soap, or I don't remember what it was. And people were so critical of that. They said, we were testing it. And people said, what are they doing? Who believes that? That's not true. That woman doesn't even know how to clean the floor. Why are you doing? So they were laughing at this thing. You know, so my view of marketing is that marketing is like a complex system. It doesn't start from the producer to persuade someone to do something. It flows from all parts simultaneously. So the first part that we do on the marketing process is trying to find out what people really would be motivated to use. For example, about 90% of the products that marketers develop are a complete failure. Why? Because it's not easy. It's so complicated. So even if you do a very good research, and if you try to find out what people really think, and you know, all those kind of things that marketing people tend to advertise about, because there's this kind of social sociology of marketing as well, of the professional marketing arena, because marketers are very good at selling themselves as we know what we are doing, we have you in our hands. And that's not the case. Because the market, in marketing, people, the market, what they call the market, but the real people are the ones who have the power to change things. And we're seeing this right now with all these ecological things, with all these gender things and all of this. People are pushing companies to change. And some companies are very traditional and authoritarian, but they are changing because the market is changing. So the one who rules the relation is the market. And that's the difference between a typical company that makes products and then sees how to sell it to the people, and marketing. Marketing is, we need to understand the people. And then people are the rulers of the market. So that's how I see marketing. It's more like a kind of, let's say, democratic process where the market rules and producers obey the market. See, so it's kind of a very, very interesting thing. What marketers call the market is a very critical group of people, pushing the companies to do something else, pushing the companies to do better things. It's kind of the other way around. So marketing is very, very interesting because you need to know people first. And this is a rhetorical principle from Aristotle. You need to know first the other one. You need to be open to the other one in order to persuade them. But when you know the other one, then you might be persuaded yourself. So that's a rhetorical principle from Aristotle, Quintilian, Cicero, all of them were like that. So that's why rhetoric and persuasion were the fundamentals of democracy. Without democracy, there was no need for rhetoric. Yes, Jim wants to say something. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, the kind of marketing I'm involved in now is not semiotics of marketing, but it's how do you market the idea of circularity and sustainability for the environment and persuade people to actually start changing their habits of consumption and decreasing their carbon footprint. And I just heard last week there an online event with Catherine Hayhoe, who is a environmentalist who has been looking at how we market global warming to people. And she outlines all of the ways in which it's being done incorrectly, in ways that enable the consumer, well, the people, to maintain a psychological cognitive distance from the whole idea of global warming, and therefore not feel any compulsion to try to change their own behavior. And then she provides a way of turning all of that around. One of the simple example that she gives, but she gives many others, is that she said, think of the images that are being used to promote an awareness of global warming. The polar bear and the ice caps melting. She said, people can understand that on one level, but that enables them to distance themselves from it, because for most people who are consuming these images, they're very far away from polar bears. They've never actually encountered a polar bear. They maybe in storybooks, but here's an example where if Roman, using the techniques you use on this kind of marketing can really be beneficial to all of humanity. And I hope that you guys who are still active in semiotics of marketing will get involved in that, because they do need help. They do need help because the people who are marketing it don't understand the things you're talking about.
Yes, yes, that's a very, very good example, Jean. And it's very difficult. I mean, we all think of marketing from, most of the times, from the negative, unethical part of it. But we also work for these kind of things, like how do we market vaccination? How do we persuade people to get their vaccines? That's a marketing issue. And it's very complicated. So you see, when we see the ethical part of marketing as they're trying to sell something, like kind of forcing us to sell something, to buy something, that sounds understandable. And that's the traditional view of marketing. But when we see all these projects that we engage with, like how do we market equality among genders? We need to change that point of view. And we do all the marketing strategies to do that. And as you know, it's very difficult. It's the same difficulty people have selling items to us. It's very complicated. But marketing people are very good at marketing themselves. So they make us think that they really know what they're doing. So they make us feel that they are the ones who rule the world. And that's not the case. Believe me, I've been working with marketing people for more than 30 years, and they don't know what they're doing. Many times what happens is the adaptation. Let me tell you this story, because I was quite surprised when I heard it. I was working with Marlboro, the big cigar brand, American cigar brand. I think it's still the best, the most sold cigar brand in the world. And I was speaking with the leader of the team that made that great success, marketing success. And he was explaining to me what he did. And he said, we were doing everything for women. This was going to be the first cigar targeted for women. And it was a great success with men. So that was a pure casualty. They didn't know what they were doing. See, but when you see the story from outside, it seems like, oh, they had a real marketing strategy and they persuaded people, and that's not the case. It was pure chance, as Peirce would say. That was just an accident. So one of the things that I've been trying to do, and some of my clients have asked me to do, is I'm trying to write a book on all these marketing fallacies, what I call marketing fallacies. Because marketing, when we see the good results of sales for some companies, like, for example, the iPhone and all of these things that we use today, it seems like, oh, they really knew. The fact is, they didn't know. It just happened sometimes. Most of the times, it's something that just happens. So I think it's a very, very interesting point. Very interesting. So when I started working in marketing, was before my semiotic interest. And I was trying to work on the Frankfurt School, the critical Frankfurt School, Marxist, Freudian, kind of approach to society. And I was very in-depth on that. I had the chance to meet Jürgen Habermas at a meeting here in Mexico. And I had a talk with him. And he explained it very easily to me. He said, that's not happening anymore, because I was studying Adorno and Marcuse and the first Frankfurt School. And Habermas told me, it's not the case. That's already happened. You should change your paradigms. The new Frankfurt School is working in something else, and we all know what Habermas did and everything. And then I started working in marketing, and I said, well, I think there was a lot of very interesting insights in the first Frankfurt School, of course, but then there was some reductionism in marketing, because people are not like that. People are much more critical than we think. And in today, I'm working on this project because many companies here in Mexico are changing everything. Their contents of sugar, their environmental concerns and everything, because the market is pushing them to change. So people are asking companies to change. And some of our clients are very interested. How can we do that? They are pressuring us. They have stopped buying our products because they are concerned about the world, and we need to change. So I think that's a very, very interesting thing to analyze. But thank you, Susan, for your question.
Roman, hello, this is Itzel from Mexico. Well, hello, me as your student many years ago. I just want to say that it has been really very interesting to understand and to learn from you and your book. I'm a graphic designer, and I work as a book designer, digital, the design of historic researches. And it's a kind of marketing as well, but well, what I understood is that I have to deliver a message, a clear message. And this has helped me a lot. And I just want to thank you, because now I am studying a PhD on design, and everything that I learned with you, or about the things that you taught us, has helped me a lot. I just want to thank you.
Thank you very much, Itzel.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. I think there's another question. Grace? I think Grace had a little hand up there.
I had, but they answered my question already. And same as Itzel, thank you very much, Roman. I was also Roman's student many years ago. That was my favorite class. He knows, I told him already. And I don't do graphic design, unfortunately, anymore, but I paint a lot. And funny enough, I don't think because obviously when you were designing, you were clearly trying to push all these semiotics and this information to signify something. I don't think I do that anymore, at least not consciously, but Roman can tell me, he's seen my work, so maybe it's already engraved in there. But yeah, they answer my questions about this marketing and things like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. I don't know if there's someone else. I don't think so. Okay, so I think we can finish our session here. I don't know if Paul has something to say, to tell us, Paul. Thank you very much to all.
Just thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And it was so nice to see you after such a long time. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
See you tomorrow then. Thank you.
Thank you for everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Alfredo.
Listo, Alfredo.
Listo, quedó.
Quedó. Pues finalmente salió bien todo.
Sí. Creo que me fui muy rápido con la idea de ahorrar tiempo.
No, muchas gracias. Yo también estaba así como de, ves que me lo eché súper rápido. También estaba, puse mi cronómetro y creo que me lo eché en 20 minutos, pero bueno, pues no había de otra.
No había de otra. Pero bueno, recuperamos tiempo.
Sí, súper bien. Además, tu inglés bien, ¿eh? O sea, no te preocupes por el inglés.
Ay, no, man, no es mi mejor idioma. Pero bueno, sí, no, la idea es ver si las podemos escribir, porque, por ejemplo, mira, tengo todos estos libros revisados, libros donde los citan, y sí sería interesante decir en qué los citan y por qué los citan, pero esto hubiera llevado 2 horas de explicación, ¿no?
No, es
Que hay
larguísimo.
unos que conceptualizaron la semiótica a partir de él, otros definen su campo semiótico excluyéndolo a él, en fin. Entonces esto habría que revisarlo pues, para hacer un mapa así muy, muy, muy cuidadoso, ¿no? Pero vamos a ver, igual y lo podemos proponer como un número o algo después, ¿no?
Así es. Pues ahí tenemos, no sé si ves los comentarios por ahí. Hay algunos comentarios por ahí.
Bueno, se congeló la imagen.
Ah, mira.
Sí.
Pues
Okay.
bien, ¿eh?
Sí,
Padre.
sí, quedó bien.
Quedó muy bien. Muchas gracias, Alfredo. Hay que seguir viéndonos más seguido, oye.
Sí, 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 a ver si en un par de semanas nos volvemos a tomar un cafecito con tiempo para platicar, ¿no? Que se quedó todo completo.
Te quedó sí, 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 pero está bien padre la plática. La verdad es que me da mucho gusto platicar contigo.
Sí, a mí también, a mí también. Y bueno, ir pensando en otras cosas. Te mando un abrazo entonces.
Sale, gracias, que estés muy bien.
Igualmente, chao.
Chao.